Today, Blaze TV host Liz Wheeler joins us to discuss the Harris campaign's strategy and where exactly Tim Walz fits in. Will the hangover from the DNC be worse than reality? Chris Bedford joins us to explain why he thinks it's a yes. And what's with the huge police presence at the DNC? Blaze News investigative journalist Steve Baker joins us from Chicago to weigh in. We have that and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Wednesday, August 21st. Well, Tim Walz is the perfect salesman for the Democrats' anti-white policies, or at least that's what an article says on theblaze.com. So here to discuss this with us is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze Media. Chris Bedford in studio. He is Blaze Media's senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent and special guest. We have Liz Wheeler, host of Blaze TV's Liz Wheeler Show. So Liz, let's start with you because this campaign strategy is pretty insane, right? Like when we look at it and we see Tim Walz being added and all of the talk about him. So what is campaign strategy like right now for Harris bringing in Tim Walz as the VP?
Sure. Hi, Jill. Hello, gentlemen. It's pretty insane, actually, if you analyze exactly why Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz, because there was a new election model prediction from The Economist a day or two ago that said that Pennsylvania has the highest chance of being the state that decides the outcome of this election. I think it has a 24% chance of being the deciding vote. And Kamala Harris had the opportunity to pick the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, to be her running mate. And had she done that, she would have obviously increased her chances of winning Pennsylvania because the voters in Pennsylvania like Josh Shapiro enough that they voted him into the governor's mansion. She chose not to pick Josh Shapiro because he's Jewish, because she instead kowtowed to this anti-Semitic, radical anti-Semitic wing of the Democratic Party, you know, the guys that are all outside of the DNC right now, the ones that look like a foreign army and not like protesters. Instead, Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz. Why? My producer, and I have to give him credit for this because I didn't come up with this line, although it's the best line that I've heard in a long time. Tim Walz is the first white man to ever have benefited as a DEI hire in the United States of America. He was picked solely because he is radical enough in his policies that Kamala Harris understands a fellow communist, recognizes one when she sees one, but also because it is an essentially racially motivated effort to portray Tim Walz as your kind of doofy Midwestern white dad in hopes that white people in the Midwest, where Kamala Harris needs to win votes if she wants to win the presidency, in hopes that these people will look at him and be like, oh, hey, he looks like me. I guess I'll vote for Kamala Harris.
So this is fascinating because the word that comes to mind is self-hating, right? I mean, if you're anti-white, I mean, the article is saying Jeremy is very good at these spicy takes. He has a whole book on the subject. It's very interesting. People should check out. But the claim here is that he's anti-white. Well, he is white. So that means he's self-hating in some way, or at least he pretends to hate himself or his heritage in order to garner votes. I find that fascinating. I mean, I think people pick up on that. But what do you think?
Yeah, his politics certainly are anti-white. There's no doubt about that. I mean, if you support DEI in any circumstance in this country, whether it's governmentally, whether it's at the corporate level, whether it's in small businesses, it doesn't matter. If you support the left's definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that requires you to discriminate against white people and particularly against white men. Tim Walz has been a huge proponent of DEI, so that in and of itself, those policies are certainly anti-white. I mean, every one of his policies is essentially, I would deem it more anti-humanity. If you think about his policies on abortion, especially in his own state of Minnesota, his policies on abortion, he allows it up until the moment of birth and even after birth. There are something like 5 or 6 babies born every year in his state that have survived botched abortions. And instead of giving them life-saving care, hospitals, doctors, nurses, because of Tim Walz's legislation that he signed into law, are leaving these babies to die on hospital tables. It's it's sickening. It is as sickening as it sounds. And you go from everything to his cozying up to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, the guy's gone to China like 24 times for what? He goes there because his ideology is shared with these communists in China, who we don't even need to go through the litany of all the human rights abuses that communism in China has inflicted on their people, from brutal one-child policies, forced abortions, to a lack of free speech, to, you know, their social credit score, to the outright abuse in the essentially concentration camps for the Uyghur Muslims. It's to hunting down dissenters all around the world, including in the United States, forcing them to spy for the Chinese Communist Party. That's what Tim Walz supports. He supports the same things that Kamala Harris supports. He supports Marxism in the United States in the form of critical race theory. He is a supporter of the transgender ideology, which is both a neo-Marxist ideology intended to turn the next generation of young people in our country into avowed Marxist revolutionaries. But it's also harmful to the children themselves in the physical way and the mental way, like supporting, making his state a haven. What did he call it? A safe space or a sanctuary state for transgender children. And I say that with quotations because there are no such thing as transgender children. It's children who have been abused into thinking or into having some kind of gender ideology, identifying with some gender ideology, and they can go to this state against the wishes of their parents and obtain puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and genital mutilation surgery. Tim Walz is a nasty, nasty person. But I guess going back to your original proposition here, your original premise, I would dub him as anti-humanity.
So where does it go from here? Because these two candidates here are not a blank canvas. Now, you compare them to Barack Obama, who in 2000 reportedly had trouble getting couldn't even get onto the floor of the convention. 2004 kind of made his debut. By 2008 was accepting the nomination. He was someone that people were able to put their hopes and dreams onto. And he was someone who, we were reminded again last night, despite having the most radical administration in 80 years, at least in the United States, was able to push through. Spoke in the language of Reagan, spoke in the language of moderation. You listen to that guy and you think, you know, I kind of agree with that. This is an uplifting vision. That seems so different from both Kamala Harris, the most liberal Democrat senator before she became the vice president of this administration, and Walz. I mean, does this rhetoric actually echo outside of those halls in the DNC, or would they need to moderate? It's a strange tact for a general election.
It is. I mean, let's be very clear about Barack Obama. He himself is not moderate in any way, shape, or form. He's not a centrist in any way, shape, or form. He is a brilliant and entertaining liar. We know that because you can compare what he has said to what he has done, his record as president, and he is the most radical president. Maybe Joe Biden was a more radical president. It kind of seems weird to even call Joe Biden the president because he's obviously not the one that's running his own White House here. But Barack Obama is the one that ushered in this era of radicalism. I think Kamala Harris and Tim Walz could never get away with being as openly radical as they are admitting that they are, except for the mainstream media's running interference for them. The mainstream media has spent the last 8 years portraying Trump and everyone associated with Trump, including anybody who voted for Trump or supported Trump or thinks that a tweet of Trump's is funny, as being extremists, as being terrorists, as being genocidal. I mean, what do they call Trump? They call him literally Hitler, a dictator, an authoritarian, a threat to democracy. So when you have that as what the mainstream media is painting Trump and Trump supporters to be, and you contrast that with even a very radical leftist like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, then the mainstream media can more easily say, well, sure, but would you rather have Trump or would you rather have Kamala Harris with, you know, her smile and Tim Walz with his kind of doofy dad look? They're able to, the mainstream media at least, is able to moderate the perception of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in a way that it's very hard to combat, actually, if you're Trump.
Last night was the Obama night at the DNC. Let's start with Michelle Obama. She had some words to say about the GOP.
Of a brighter day. The chance to vanquish the demons of fear, division, and hate that have consumed us and continue pursuing the unfinished promise of this great nation.
So much joy there, Liz. So much joy emanating there from Michelle Obama.
She calling us demons? I couldn't even really tell. It was like a word salad, sort of.
Well, I think that's actually important to understand when you have Kamala Harris out there, and Michelle Obama was lending her gravitas, if you will, to Kamala on this night. And she's going out there and orating and making sure that everybody knows that Kamala Harris is my girl.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle Obama, it's the rebranding of Michelle Obama is actually a case study in the power of the mainstream media. If you think about when Barack Obama came on the scene, not even in 2004, but when he came on the scene in 2007 as the presumptive nominee, Michelle Obama was viewed as a liability to him because there was that video of her saying that this is the first time she's ever been proud to be an American. And back in 2007 or 2008, patriotism was very strong in our country. It hadn't been fully desecrated by the left. And so they took Michelle Obama actually out of the campaign circuit a little bit, off of air, and tried to just have Obama, who has a very friendly demeanor, and he's a very good speaker and liar, as we just noted. And Michelle Obama has been completely remade because Hollywood decided that she should, and the mainstream media decided that she should be. She went on tour. She wrote her book. She's now, I think Democrats actually probably would have preferred Michelle Obama to be the nominee versus Kamala Harris. And I'm glad she's not, because I think that the rebranding of Michelle Obama has been incredibly effective. She's one of the most liked political figures in our entire country now, which is mind-boggling given, you know, her own record and her own statements on this country and her own radical positions. But Kamala Harris, in a sense, should be grateful for that endorsement. But man, it just calls to mind every time you hear something, that kind of phraseology, calling us demons. It just makes you understand how that attempted assassination of Trump happened. This is what the left has been doing. They've been looking at you and I. We just want to homeschool our children and grow our own food and live in peace and defend our families and worship our God and be proud of our country and teach our children to live free. And they are looking at us, and they're not only calling us weirdos, but they're looking at us and they're calling us now actual demons. This is the reason that the attempted assassination of President Trump was able to happen, because what do you expect people to do? How do you expect people to react when you're told that what you're facing is actually Satan?
You can't live and let live your way out of communism. Liz Wheeler, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jill.
The joy at the DNC could be followed by a hangover, our Chris Bedford explains up next. In this economy, we know that healthcare costs are out of control, and we know that the government isn't the answer. So where can you turn? Well, look at Lassie Health. That's L-A-A-S-Y. And it's not health insurance, so you have access to healthcare without all of the red tape, the restrictions, and inflated costs. And you know what? You don't have to wait until the end of the year for open enrollment, because it's not healthcare. And it starts at just $30 a month. And with that, you can get transparent pricing, comprehensive coverage tailored for your needs of yourself, your family, or your business. And you'll have access to the healthcare that you want without breaking the bank. And there's no annual or lifetime caps on these services. And you can start the plan at any time. Right now, if you want to go ahead and give them a call, you can get over 400 prescriptions for free. Free, unlimited, 24/7 virtual urgent care. Lab tests are up to 65% off. Image tests up to 75% off, and procedures and surgeries are up to 50% off. So when I say Lassie Health is a game changer, I mean it. Go ahead and check out their affordable plans that put you in control of your healthcare at healthylink.com/blaze. For a limited time, get your first month free, up to $100 off eligible plans. So get healthy, be healthy, and stay healthy without breaking the bank at healthylink.com/blaze. Will the hangover from the DNC be worse than the reality? That's the argument made by Chris Bedford in his latest edition of the Beltway Brief at theblaze.com. So, Chris, let's explain what you mean by the hangover actually being worse.
Okay, so this started with the idea of, you know how all of your kind of conservative friends have really been panicked since Kamala Harris got the pick. The polls started to close. I don't actually think that the reality is nearly as bad as the fact that there was such a strange high for conservatives during that Republican convention. I mean, Donald Trump had just barely survived a murderous assassination attempt on television. The lawfare around him had collapsed. Joe Biden's debate performance was abysmal. He was facing a public, messy coup. I mean, there was talks about another Reagan landslide. There was talks about another Nixon landslide. There was talks about winning New Jersey, and the Senate and the House are absolutely going to clean up. And that's a very strange feeling to be a conservative in America who has optimism. Like, oh, it's going to be great. But then, of course, at the end of the RNC, people started to panic online because Donald Trump came on 40 minutes late and gave a kind of boring speech. which was in his traditional style that a lot of people do like, that kind of spoken word, half comedy style. And people say, oh my gosh, it's all over. And then when Kamala Harris comes out and the polls start to tighten, people got blackpilled, which is just, they became kind of nihilistic about the idea. But the reality of the matter is much worse than just the come down from that pretty incredible high right there. And Democrats have been partying for even longer, kind of unsurprisingly. They've had a couple weeks now of this unending coverage. Kamala Harris is actually a pretty persuasive figure when you see just an illustration of her on the cover of Time magazine. Like, wow, that looks really uplifting.
And she didn't even give an interview.
No, but then you hear her talk. You see Hillary Clinton come back out on Monday, and it's like, oh yeah, that's a person who more people voted against her, probably, than maybe even voted for Donald Trump in 2016. You see these figures start to reappear. You see Joe Biden come on at 11:30 at night, late for his own funeral in a classic Irish manner. And you see the Obamas can't even be on the same stage, they don't even want to be in the same city as Joe Biden and as Kamala and Walz. They had to leave because Joe Biden's so mad at them. And you see all these news articles about, hey, this really well-run, unified DNC is actually beset by rioters and protesters. It isn't that well-run at all. And I start to think that this thin visage, this Wizard of Oz sort of thing that's gone around the Kamala campaign might be coming to an end. The hangover's going to stink.
I would love to see that. I love your point that both sides do this, though. I mean, this is just what people do. And so that point from your piece, which I really urge everyone to go out and check out and subscribe to the Beltway Brief, of course, the newsletter from Chris. That point is key because everyone was riding high. It seemed almost as if Trump was inevitable. This thing was over. And I know lots of people who, different levels of political engagement, and some people who are just kind of like, Republican, whatever. They thought this was done. It was in the bag. They knew what the results would be. Then the uncertainty of Biden stepping down, and then the Kamala thing. So where does that leave us now? Because when you look at this, the last couple nights of the convention, I feel like there's a lot of unanswered questions, and you just kind of led right into them. You see a couple different things going on. We were all just reminded of the old Obama way, the Obama pretending to be the rational moderate. And it was striking because we haven't seen that. Where is that rhetoric, right? There's a rhetoric I haven't heard in a long, long time. We haven't heard that in a while. And all of a sudden it comes back. And it reminds you that Kamala and Tim are not like that. They're not saying that sort of thing.
No, they're not.
There's not unity in messaging perhaps here. And maybe they should go the Obama way, and maybe they should go the other way. And is that up in the air now, too? I mean, what do you make of this?
Now, Barack Obama is an interesting character because despite his reputation for being an incredible speaker, there's not that many lines that people can quote of him because he just makes it feel good. It's like spa music in the background.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I feel hopeful. I feel uplifted. What did he just say? It was great. It was really nice. Like opium or something. But we saw some of that again last night, and it paints such a strong contrast. But he also I think he turned out, you know how Republicans say every time, and Democrats, this is the election that we cannot afford to lose. Well, Barack Obama's second term might have been the election that Republicans couldn't afford to lose. The racial animus in this country skyrocketed. The divisions in this country skyrocketed. But it wasn't simply between Republicans and Democrats. It was also between the Democrat coalition. Mm-hmm. It was the Greenies and the Labor guys are at each other's throats. Yes. The working class whites and Hispanics and blacks don't necessarily get along with the LGBT and the Q. Mm-hmm. All of those things start to come at each other. Who's going to be in charge? And with Joe Biden, when he was president, it was basically grandpa's here to babysit you, raid the candy, tell him your bedtime is 1 a.m., and he'll let you do it. And activists have been able to run the administration.
Which was Obama's thing, right? I mean, he's the one who said we got to get together and do this.
He ushered them in. I mean, if you remember, by the time of 26, by the time he was leaving office, you had illegal immigrants heckling him at pressers inside the White House. Now, it's hard to get inside the White House. You need an appointment. You need identification. And these people who he'd literally invited, and figuratively, into his own home were heckling him. He was barely able to keep it together with that uplifting rhetoric, with that magnanimous political charisma. Kamala Harris doesn't have that. Walz doesn't even have that. Joe Biden and the other octogenarians definitely don't have it. So the ability to hold this coalition together is really breaking. And that last night painted such a stark contrast with the Democrats who they're running with and the Democrats they were. And Barack Obama can't pull you across the finish line. I think it was 2016 where the last rally was in Philadelphia, and Bruce Springsteen was there, and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and there. I mean, this was Madam President was coming in. Mm-hmm. It was such a joyous moment. And then Pennsylvania voted against her because that was a good concert, but I don't think it actually was what made people vote.
I think that Fox News wishes that Barack Obama was actually still in office because they had the ratings galore then. But according to a new article from Axios, they said that Fox News is trying to get a wider audience for this election, trying to go after some of the Democrats and independents. So what's the actual move here, Chris?
Well, you saw it last night. They put on, the Fox had a lot of their nice people on there. Dana Perino, she's not a mean, foaming at the mouth commentator, former White House Republican of the Bush administration. They're trying to be people who would say nice things about Barack Obama's speech. I actually think that you could go a little harder on Obama. He's a liar. He's someone who's an absolute and total radical. He talks the talk, but as far as people who've changed the economy of this country, changed the culture of this country, changed the temperature, he's done more harm than any president I can think of. Biden's just been asleep at the wheel. But they said nice things. And, you know, there could be some good to this strategy. Because if you look at CNN or MSNBC, God help you, you're filled with hate. You think there's no border crisis. You think that Republicans and white men are evil. You think that Christianity is a force for bad. And if you look at Fox News, you're not going to get remotely the kind of stuff you're going to get at Blaze. You're not going to get a conservative Christian take. You're not going to get, red pilled and a lot of the stuff that's going on, but you won't be turned crazy. So if people want to tune in and kind of hear that news and it reaches more Democrats, that's a positive thing.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think this shows where we are. I mean, it shows where we are because you're in this time of, things realign and they shift. And what happened was CNN used to be known as this.
That was a laugh line.
They never quite were, but it wasn't quite the laugh line it is now. And so now you know that you have all these cable networks that are absolutely insane, 150% for one side. And that really, speaking of Obama, that's when that transformation really occurred. And so all of a sudden, Fox has by proxy become the moderate. So that's not a bad business strategy, but it's also just kind of what's happened to them. I mean, they're the ones who kicked Tucker and others out. And so look, they did this to themselves, right? They became centrists, whatever you want to call it. Libs, Republicans, the Uniparty. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and you hear that more and more from disaffected Democrats and people who've decided to switch parties to vote for Donald Trump is that they thought that they were moderate, and they are no longer moderate by modern standards. Remember Harry Reid started his career with a 100 rating from the NRA.
Yes.
I think he was even pro-life.
Yes.
I mean, the party has changed so much.
Exactly.
And, if more people want to tune into less crazy stuff, then the better. But the most people should be subscribing here.
They should be. And you know what? When we come back, we will have more right here because we're going to be talking about could RFK Jr. and Donald Trump be joining forces? A member of the Trump family might have just dropped a hint. You don't want to miss it. This Thursday, Blaze News Tonight's very own Chris Bedford, Blaze Media senior politics editor and DC correspondent. He's here in with us studio. But you know what? He is going to be answering all of your questions exclusively on Blaze TV. So if you say, Jill, you didn't ask all the right questions that we wanted to know from Chris Bedford, now is your chance. So you can watch and participate in the Off the Record. You need to be a Blaze TV Plus subscriber. So if you aren't a subscriber, go ahead, go over to blazetv.com/offtherecord and use code Bedford for $20 off your first year of Blaze TV Plus. And you've made it, Chris Bedford, when you have your own promo code. On Off the Record, you get to steer the conversation. Chris will be answering all of your questions about the DNC, Donald Trump, or anything else that you want to ask. So you also can ask what it's like to work with me, but if they do, you have to be really nice, Chris. So I'm just saying,
charming.
You're going to come back here tomorrow night, so you better be nice to us here. But join us on Blaze TV tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, noon Central, and don't forget to join Blaze TV Plus by visiting blazetv.com/offtherecord. Use the promo code Bedford for $20 off your first year. Donald Trump is reportedly open to RFK Jr. joining his administration should he win this November. This comes as RFK prepares to address the nation live on Friday amid rumors that he will drop out and endorse Trump. So here's what Donald Trump Jr. had to say about the speculation on the Glenn Beck program earlier today.
The endorsement from RFK, do you think that's coming?
Listen, I hope so. I think RFK, I think he's a smart guy. I think he's actually got very good views on certain things. I think there's other things, we're going to disagree with him on. But I think it shows sort of a unity against, literally, you mentioned it before I hopped on, about the communism that we are up against. It's not hyperbole anymore. It's not like, they're just a little bit more left than us. It's not, these people, she's talking about, we want to set up price fixing, and we want to set up this, and we're going to be auditing businesses, and we're going to take away your business, and we're going to take away your children if we, can't do, drive-through, transgender surgeries for minors without parental consent.
Right.
They've lost their minds, and so I love the idea. I love the idea of giving him some sort of role in some sort of major three-letter entity or whatever it may be, and let him blow it up. I think that's what we need, and so I think that kind of unity, even where there may be certain disagreements on certain things, I think he could be a really great asset for that. I think he could bring people together, and I think it shows a strong, a strong opposition to what we are up against, which is just abject insanity.
So, Chris, would teaming up with RFK Jr. be a good move for the Trump campaign?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. I mean, the RFK Jr. has kind of been portrayed for a long time as someone who's a big threat to Democrats, but the reality is he's a threat to both parties. And the polling started to show the Democrats have done everything they could to sabotage his campaign. But now I think that there are some states where RFK Jr.'s kind of independent thinking needs a home other than him, and it needs a home maybe with Trump. And then if this were to happen, to cap off a week of Democrat coverage at the DNC with this endorsement, third-party candidate dropping out, well, that'd be a good show.
It would be a good show. It's better than what the DNC has going on right now. Anything is. But with the DNC last night, we see the unity potentially between Donald Trump and RFK Jr. Michelle Obama took the stage last night, Chris, and they were trying to play it off as there was the unity there with Kamala Harris. It didn't feel real, though, is it?
No. There's not a lot of unity there. I mean, Michelle Obama was talking about as if Joe Biden didn't even exist, if he didn't live. This is the dawn of hope. This is finally the comeback. Maybe this is a black job. And that was a good line against Trump. But in general, she was acting like she wasn't talking about the sitting vice president. She was talking about some kind of outsider, that this was the return of the Obamas. And what's even worse than that, and Joe Biden wasn't there, obviously. He can't stand the Obamas right now. That relationship was cold before the Obamas helped push him out. Word is Kamala Harris and Walz had to leave the convention so that they wouldn't be seen with Obama because the Joe Biden was so heated about this. But at the same time, she also doesn't like doesn't like Kamala Harris. I mean, when Kamala became the vice president, she wouldn't even re-record her DNC video, sit down for 10 minutes and record a Skype video to mention this moment that she now heralds as historic. She couldn't be bothered to. She and her husband were among the last prominent Democrats to endorse Kamala Harris for president this time. So they put on a good show, and they make their millions coming out there. But there's a lot of problems at the top.
Chris, one of my favorite moments was when Michelle Obama came out and said, we're having hope make a comeback. Like she didn't know that Kamala Harris is currently part of the vice president and presidential ticket that's actually running the country right now. Like making a comeback from what? Yeah,
she is so... The Obamas have been so cruel to Joe Biden. And it wasn't just when he was vice president. You could see them rolling their eyes at him when he was Obama's vice president. Then when he wanted to run for president, they said, sit down. It's Hillary Clinton's turn. And then when he wanted to run again, they were about the last people to endorse him. And that animus is on display, despite Obama's kind words about him being my brother and I gave him a birthday necklace or a bracelet. They're not pals.
Yeah, so call me crazy, but two things along those lines. One is, Michelle, first off, the Obamas gave the best speeches, in my opinion, that have been given at this event, right, with the low bar, but they were actually really good.
You didn't like AOC's Mussolini impression?
No. I'm not into that. I mean, not into that impression. But you got to think about this, right? Michelle comes in. They don't like these people. They're also in charge of them in a way. And she gave an incredible speech that would make anyone who already was desirous of Michelle Obama running for office, they're drooling. I mean, they're saying this was amazing, and it was amazing. It felt to me like I would like to listen to it, even though I know how evil and corrupt these people are. Because it just sounded like someone speaking plain English and coming straight through and saying things with clarity, right? And a little bit of pizzazz and energy. But notice what she didn't do. She didn't give like a crazy lefty speech. And then Obama did the same thing. So I felt like what was going on is sort of like, we're coming in, we're teaching you a master class. This is the way you should be arguing. We're modeling something that, by the way, you guys haven't done. None of you have actually accomplished this sort of rhetoric, and we're giving you a model of the way forward.
Yeah, there's no persuasion outside of them at the Democratic National Convention. None at all on display. The Obamas gave that masterclass, and like we were just talking about, their ability for this coalition, this delicate, fractious group of people, to not just turn on each other when the Obamas leave the stage. It's a hard fight.
Well, Michelle Obama is just going to yell, do something, until they actually get their butts in gear. And we'll come back and talk about a lot more after this. The executive vice president of the Heritage Foundation will join us to clarify what the DNC got wrong about Project 2025 when we return.
Tonight, I want to tell you about just one aspect of Project 2025. It's planned to turn Donald Trump into a dictator.
At the DNC, Democrats have taken the opportunity to lie about the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, characterizing the document as an authoritarian blueprint for a dystopian future. Here to discuss is Ryan Walker, Executive Vice President for Heritage Action for America. So, Ryan, is Project 2025 actually going to make Trump the dictator that they claim he will become?
No, of course not. This is an attempt by the DNC and Kamala Harris to create a boogeyman, to use fear and that concept to convince the American people that this agenda, which they're lying about, will somehow negatively impact their lives. But this is all because Biden and now Harris have no record that they can stand on and present to the American people that's widely accepted or agreed to. They have no policies. They cannot say, let's continue the things that we have been doing for the past 4 years. It will only get better. So they have created a boogeyman to instill fear in the American people.
So one question for you is, one of the ways that they were able to make this boogeyman is because of all the press that Project 2025 was getting. The interviews that were done, it was much more upfront than Heritage's usual efforts on this front, which you've been doing for decades, essentially, with Republican administrations. Was that maybe a miscalculation to be so upfront and to talk about this so publicly as to end up kind of in a brouhaha with the campaign itself?
Well, listen, I think the Harris campaign has spent millions of dollars online and in the public promoting the lies about the policies that are contained within Project 2025 to create this boogeyman. Sure, you could point to media appearances and all of that, but I don't think without the campaign's engagement and their continued lies about what's actually in the mandate for leadership, that this would be an issue at all.
So, Ryan, is this still an ongoing media campaign? You guys are out kind of punching back, right, against the left, and that's something you intend to continue to do.
Well, that's right. And we've seen the legacy media outlets like the AP, Washington Post, and others. CNN is included in that. Dozens of fact checks now have gone out and been issued. They've had to issue retractions or corrections to their stories. In fact, the AP just deleted a tweet because it was highly inaccurate. And we at the Heritage Foundation were able to push back and tell them the truth about what's actually in the mandate. So I think they'll continue to fearmonger because, again, they have no platform to communicate to the American people that's widely accepted. Kamala Harris has taken the tact of stealing ideas from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and the no tax on tips and an increase in the child tax credit. And unfortunately, she's stolen the idea of capping food prices from Joseph Stalin, which is not widely accepted amongst the American people. So that's what's happening now. They're trying to create fear amongst the American people, which is a theme that Barack Obama last night spoke about on stage, about how Donald Trump and Republicans across the country were supposedly using fear to try and win the election. I would say that the Democrats and the Democratic Party, they're the ones instilling fear and creating the boogeyman that is Project 25.
Ryan, when I was scrolling around on X, I came across a post from Joel Berry. He's the managing editor of the Babylon Bee, and he said, "So I decided to finally check out Project 2025, and it seems to be a comprehensive plan to shutter federal agencies, fire thousands of government bureaucrats, and give back power to the American people." Sounds good to me, right? And when you look at it, they go through and the leftists try and say, oh, all of these things are so terrible. But when you dig into it and you just say, wait a minute, this is what it's actually going to do. Do you find that people, when they actually do dig into it and look at it a little bit further, have a different mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, you mentioned this previously. We've been doing this at the Heritage Foundation since the 80s. This is a lot of the information and policy solutions contained within that document are traditional Republican policy solutions. And as an anecdote, I heard from a focus group, a constituent or a voter in the state of Michigan, get on and say that she was worried about implementation of Project 25. And they asked her specifically, what policies do you oppose? And she mentioned that she doesn't like the Schedule F changes to the federal workforce, but then immediately pivoted to, well, there were actually solutions in the document that I actually agreed with, like the suggestions on budgeting. And she mentioned how she didn't think that the United States government was adequately budgeting for our fiscal needs, and said that she adhered or agreed to the suggestions contained within there. So again, I think that this is a misinformation campaign, and Kamala Harris and the Democrats have spent millions of dollars to make it so. And as more information comes out and the actual solutions that are contained within Mandate for Leadership are publicized or made more aware to the American people, I think that they largely fall into the camp of either neutral or they actually end up supporting it.
There was a lot of people looking back after 2020 saying that despite all the accomplishments of the first 4 years of a Trump administration, there were so many different traps they fell into, so many times that they were pulled back by the federal government, so many small little betrayals from the career workforce, so many different places that they got mired where maybe a more experienced administration wouldn't have. And there's a lot of hopes about trying to change that. But over these next 4 years, of course, Joe Biden has been essentially booby-trapping the federal government from being able to change, making it more difficult to fire civil servants, trying to lock the United States into some of the global warming treaties. How confident are you that you'll actually be able to not just peel that back, the last 4 years or so of damage to the country, but actually go out of the way in a deeper way that even Ronald Reagan wasn't able to do, to make it so the federal government can't just simply re-encroach next time a Democrat wins?
Listen, I think for the last 4 years, members of the previous administration, Donald Trump's administration, and others, experts and allies of the Republican Party, have been thinking about just that. I think they've been preparing, they've been putting things in writing so that they have a plan for not just the first 180 days, but for the entirety of the 4 years of the second term. And so I think that a lot of folks will come back into the fold, go back into the administration with 4 years of incredible experience. They will know all of the various angles that they need to address and things to look out for, and importantly, plan for in those waning years as they are looking toward the exits. I think that they've been educated, right? They've gone through this now. They've been a part of the federal government in a substantial way, and I think that they'll know the trappings, if you will, of what this administration is putting in place to try and trip them up.
Ryan, first, just a word about the disinformation. I mean, I do think we should take a step back and just acknowledge for the audience, the misinformation here is hilarious. I mean, it actually, if you take a step back, I mean, it's so serious, games we play in media, but what they're saying is legit funny. I mean, if you're going to be a dictator, you could probably wouldn't put out the plan, with your Washington think tank. Here's my step-by-step plan to become Mussolini or Hitler. I mean, the whole thing is sort of hilarious. But more seriously, looking forward, there's obviously been some awkwardness about this on the right. And I'm curious if there's any progress or inroads to quelling some of this misinformation and its effect on the right and with the campaign.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, I think that we have certainly pushed back on these major media outlets. We don't let a commentary go unsaid these days without proving the facts and circumstances of the case, pointing them to the written document that contains all of this information, and course correcting and fact checking what they're putting out. I mentioned the AP has become basically an outlet for the left. They've had to delete tweets. The Washington Post has had to correct stories. CNN has had to come out publicly and say that they were wrong about the information that they had put out. So, yeah, I think there's absolutely a course correction here. And I think you've seen that over the past few weeks, somewhat setting the convention aside. Some of that noise has died down. So I think that we are getting there and, we're ready for November.
Ryan, I just feel the need to yell fake news right now. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
We'll have the latest from the mostly peaceful protests at the DNC coming up. The far-left protests outside the DNC have continued to intensify this week. Blaze News investigative journalist Steve Baker joins us now from Chicago for an update. So, Steve, thanks for joining us. Now, I've heard that there are a ton of cops out there on the streets, but, man, I thought these protests were mostly peaceful, Steve.
Well, they were mostly peaceful until last night. We had one that got out of hand. But, the incredible part about this, Jill, is that the police presence is absolutely overwhelming. I would estimate, just from my own visual perception, that there were no more than 100 actual protesters involved in this riot, which was in front of the Israeli consulate here in Chicago. And it was of course, it was an anti-Israeli, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian rally. And then there was counter protesters, probably a small group of about 25 pro-Israel protesters there as well. They were completely surrounded and protected by cops. They had no chance of them getting in trouble or being attacked. And it was, in fact, a mostly peaceful event for the first part of it. And then just after dark, it got out of hand. But the thing that is really incredible about this particular event, as opposed to other events, is the overwhelming presence of the various police departments, Chicago PD in particular, but also Illinois state troopers and other agencies as well. And the protesters were far outnumbered by law enforcement, but they were also far outnumbered by journalists and photojournalists. I'm telling you, there were more photojournalists in that crowd last night than there were actual protesters. And when it got out of hand, some of those journalists got caught up in it, in the shoving, the pushing, in the scrum, so to speak. And there were actual arrests made of media, of actually credentialed media last night, even one gentleman from the New York Times.
You've seen such a change, Steve, in the security measures around conventions. When Mitt Romney was running for president, when George W. Bush was having his convention, all the security measures seemed prepared to get rid of bombs, to stop terrorist attacks, to stop truck bombs. Now it seems like security measures are more around crowd control, despite the fact that there are more people dressed as jihadis seemingly outside of these conventions. It's a domestic threat to peace as opposed to a foreign threat to peace. How have the security operations that you've seen impacted the ability for the convention to continue, and how effectively have they tackled the violence when it does come out?
Well, there were bomb threats yesterday at 4 of the hotels. I actually captured on video one of the bomb K-9 sweep teams working the buildings around the hotels. The larger hotels here are very, very heavily guarded, very large police presences because there's a lot of VIPs, Democratic Party VIPs, congressmen, senators, various other muckety-mucks of all types. And so there's a tremendous amount of not only uniformed police, but their private protection as well. Obviously, if they're here from D.C., they've got the United States Capitol Police Dignitary Protection Detail, so you can, they stick out like sore thumbs. They are easily identifiable, and the black SUVs surround the hotels as well. and then they're taking their VIPs over to the arena from the hotel. So there's quite a large presence. And I would say, being in one of the largest hotels here, that we're probably in the safest spot we can be in the city, as much protection as there is here. But overall, the presence of the police, I think, has actually minimized the threat, because we had, and we're following the intel from Chicago PD of the flyers that were being sent to us for all of the protest events. And I'm talking about the most radical groups of all. And none of those have really materialized in anything we've seen at previous, certainly not 1968, not yet anyway. And even what happened last night was over fairly quickly, but it did get violent for a while.
Steve, it is remarkable that people should just dwell on that overwhelming force is what's keeping the peace outside the DNC. It sounds fascist to me, and never mind the many barriers, right? And the fact they built the wall 10 feet higher, as Julio told us the other day, in response to these protests. But I have two questions for you, both very important. Number one, have you seen Julio, and you're keeping an eye on him for us? Both Chris and I need to keep track of this guy. And then number two, I know that you've been out and about and talking to people. Very curious what you've learned and what the vibes are from all the attendees.
Yeah, as to the first question, I see Julio at least a couple of times, and then he will come in from one of the riots and take a shower and then come down and join us in either a restaurant or the bar area where we're talking to people. And I'm just mingling. And so that, to get to your second question, I'm mingling with the crowd. I'm getting the impressions of what they are seeing, their impressions of the rally itself at the arena, and of course they don't, because of how late it's been going, they don't get back to the hotel till quite late at night. But they're keeping the bars and the restaurants open late for them when they get back, and they're pretty exuberant. They're talkative. But I will tell you, Matt, this is the most unusual circumstance. I don't think that we're going to get a lot of Project Veritas or James O'Keefe type moments, because the speeches themselves are so radical and they're saying so much about their agenda with their outside voices on the stage from the speakers, that when you're talking to people and mingling with them in the lounges at the hotels, there's not really that much else that they can say that we would deem to be radical or surprising or newsworthy, because, as I said, everything's being said in the convention itself, from the stage, by the speakers themselves, and they're saying it with their outside voices. They're laying their agenda out, and there's just nothing shocking.
Well, you say that about the speeches, but I want, in about 20 seconds, Steve, for our final question for you, describe the craziest looking person at the DNC, because I know that there are some freaks out there.
Yeah, well, there's some crazies out there, and they're much more, I would say, conservatively dressed in the places where we're staying around all the VIPs. So there's not any crazy stuff, although there have been a couple of cross-dressing type people. We've seen some people that I've actually spoken to people that told me that they were drag queens on the side. And so that's what they're doing in their regular life, I suppose, but they're not acting like that here.
Steve, thanks so much. Now, stay safe out there. Don't mingle with all those crazies, all right?
We will. We will be safe, I promise you.
Sounds good. And Chris Bedford, thanks so much for joining us in studio. We usually have to look at you through the monitor, so it's so nice to have you here in studio.
It's great to be here.
I mean, I can't believe you're real. I'm just going to get over here into your frame.
Am I real? Is anything?
Is anything real?
You're going to be.
Are we in a simulation? We did that yesterday.
Told us that yesterday. But you're going to be back here tomorrow as well.
As
with
will
us.
we. Blaze News tonight. We'll see you then.